So Ted Peters is Research Professor Emeritus in Systematic Theology and Ethics at the Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary, part of the G2 Consortium, and at CGS. Ted was a Russell Fellow in 2006, focusing on theistic evolution and the cases for it. Ted has authored, co-authored, edited, and co-edited more than 24 books. The topics range from sin and evil to the future of God, and to points where science and religion clash and cooperate. His recent books include God and Cosmic History, where science and history meet religion, and Astrotheology, Science and Theology meet extraterrestrial life. Ted offers a theological analysis of culture, analyzing especially the role of science in culture. For nearly 20 years, he and I have co-edited the journal Theology and Science. Ted is also an interim pastor at Cross and Crown Lutheran Church and School in Luna Park. And he is the author of the series, Leona Fox Suspense Thrillers. Quite rare for a theologian. All those are found on your website. Speaking personally, Ted is both a cherished colleague for more than 3 decades and a precious friend. Ted Peters.
Thank you, Bob. Good to be here. Adam, we're proud of you. Adam came here as a gem, and all Bob did in his years was polish him up a little bit. He continues to grow. Thanks Hyunju and Jamie and Braden for good responses. Let's see, I want to, which button just to answer?
I think if you go down, there you go.
I like scientists and theologians who give us definitions. And this is one of the definitions in Adam's paper that I particularly like, mainly because I agree with 3/4 of it. The task of the contemporary theologian is to interpret symbols. I think that's important. A lot of theologians overlook the fact that our primary language of religion is symbolic in character, and symbols are multivalent. They have different dimensions of meaning, and part of the job of the theologian is to reflect on that meaning. He also says, in this case, the doctrine is a symbol. You rarely see that in theologians. I studied under Langdon Gilkey at the University of Chicago, and he would say, creation is a symbol, just waiting there to be interpreted, okay? So I appreciate Adam's articulation there. Then it goes, in light of a given context of engagement, I presume that means you don't like meta-narratives, you don't like universals, okay. That provides a hermeneutical framework. I like that because I think that all theologians are always engaged in hermeneutics, whether they know it or not, so that word should be there. And I would even venture to say that many scientists are engaged in hermeneutics and utterly oblivious to what they're doing, in which the symbol can meaningfully, now this is the point where I disagree. He wants the symbol theologically interpreted to inspire ways of being in the world and the formation of values in a given community. Well, in terms of the agreement, I believe we start with symbols. I'm a student of Paul Ricoeur, and Ricoeur says famously, the symbol gives rise to thought. So thought is sort of precise. Symbols are have multiple meanings. And I think that's what theology has as its task. It's really the thinking in which it asks for greater precision than what the symbols give. Inspiration. Now, I want to say what I like about the way Adam says it, it's not the theologian who inspires, it's the symbol that inspires. The symbol always says more than the interpreter can say about it. So I think Adam gets that right, even though I do not think of my task as a theologian to be inspiring. And all my students may just agree. It is the task of the church, it's the task of the pastor to be inspiring, to be sure, but not necessarily the theologian. So that's the little part there where I would do it differently. It's not a criticism, just my way of doing it. Oops. All right. The significance of astrobiology, and this I take to be the thesis of at least the scientific portion of the paper. Astrobiology helps us to think about the interaction of living systems. Instead of you and I having interaction with our environment, it's the interaction of the whole biosphere. And habitability, it is not specifically only about the discovery of alien life. That's a downer. I discuss this with my alien friends, and they just don't like being marginalized. What do you mean? Astrobiology is not about us, Adam. Nevertheless, oh yeah, well, here we are. First, I'd like to thank everyone who believed in it. But Adam is correct in saying, descriptively, that if astrobiologists never find an alien, the knowledge they have gained from their research is going to greatly enhance what we know about the cosmos. So I think we'll have to accept that. Now what Adam does is he goes on and he builds on this observation then what he wants to say theologically. So, remember there's three categories, theological categories: imago Dei, and vocation and sin. So the imago Dei, as you heard him say, human being is a symbol of refracting divine creativity. Refracting is just fine with me. I notice it's creativity. Nothing in there about redeeming activity. So either he forgot about it or his Lutheran conscience got to him, you know, human beings never do what God's supposed to be doing. God alone redeems. But in terms of what Adam says, and Braden picked up on it, planetarity. Now I like that word, I like the concept, and I think about your and my ethical obligation, I think, these days, for many reasons, whether it's the environmental crisis or it's thinking about outer space. We need to think of everyone on the planet, Earth, as participating in the community of moral deliberation. You can't limit it to identities or nations or races. We're in this one together. So I'm going to be very sympathetic as Adam develops his notion of planetarity. But note, it's not immediately ethical. It's first of all ontological. Who are we? And he wants to deal with the imago Dei in the human race beyond what's personal. Your and my personalness or personality is not ultimate. There's something more ultimate for him. To be human is to be one aspect of a biological system. Adam wants to de-center the human being. I want to say, what? Really? Now, descriptively, of course, how can you disagree that you and I are relata within a relational biosphere? Of course. That's holistic thinking, it's good and healthy thinking, etc. But what are the implications of the decentering of the human being? Now, the word eugenics came up, and I want to say that's implication number one. The concept of human dignity is the prize for a long and well-fought war on the part of the modern world against what? Pre-modern tribalism, in which people in the tribe next door are not human. Dine, if you're a Navajo Indian, is the word for human, and anybody who's not a Navajo is not human, right? And in the pre-modern world, that justified slavery and cannibalism. And in the modern world, it was tough to get rid of slavery. Cannibalism went away, but, you know, and we got McDonald's. But it was hard to get rid of slavery, and even today we have a hard time getting rid of slavery. So dignity in the modern world, as Immanuel Kant tells us, is to treat each individual human person as an end and not merely as a means to something else. I want to say, I think that is the single most important moral quality of the modern world. I don't want to give that one up. I don't want to give that one up. It was given up by the Nazis during the, in Germany during the Nazi period, and it led to genocide. It was given up by the Hutus in 1995 when they decided to have a genocide against the Tutsis. I don't want to give it up. As soon as you give it up, forces can come in and de-dignify portions of the human race. So my question to Adam is going to be, do you really want to give this up? And if you don't, if you want to keep it, then it's going to introduce incoherence into your understanding of the Imago Dei. Imago Dei, for you and I and the human species, to refract the image of God. To be the image of God describes not a single species or genus, but a new state in the ordering and meaningful existence of all creation. So this is superhuman now, okay? It's not just human beings, but it's moving towards the whole biosphere of which we are a part. Now, my second question for Adam, how do you ground this? Do you ground this in Adam and Eve? We have a theological school of thought that begins with St. Paul, who argues that it is Christ who is the image of God in humanity. And Karl Barth and similar theologians will argue that Adam and Eve are the image of God in the human race only in anticipation of what we get with Jesus Christ, because what Jesus Christ adds that we didn't see in Adam and Eve is resurrection. So it is the resurrected human person retroactively moving from Christ back to Adam and Eve that constitutes the image. So there's more than one way to get at the image of God. One is to look at certain traits. So Adam and Eve know the difference between good and evil. Or Adam and Eve are rational, and that certainly is a dominant trait that modern people believe human beings share with God, etc. Or, if you're like Karl Barth and others, it's this special relationship we have with God, whether we're rational or not, or whether we know the difference between good and evil or not. And so I'd like to say to Adam, how did you get from the biblical notion of Imago Dei to something like this? And did you go to a third place? Maybe not a shared trait, not a Christology-centered Imago Dei, but a third place to ground it. That's my second question. Vocation, I like the idea of grounding our ethics in vocation. God has called us from nothing into something. God calls us as a human race into having moral responsibility. I'm not going to criticize you here. I think you got this nice. To be the Imago Dei in the planetary sense is to open new meaningful modes of interaction and artfulness between current living systems and the habitable environments. I think artfulness is maybe the chief quality that our vocation calls us to. I think that's all nicely done. Sin, then, consistent with what has just been said, would be poorly formed planetary vocation. As I say, we fail to live up to our vocational obligation. Being that, fosters, there should be an O in there, that fosters a destructive relationship between living systems and the wider habitable environment. It means you don't recycle. I'm sorry. It's more than that, of course. I just want to say I find all that coherent, just fine. Now, let me pose my third question. Should we go to Mars, or shouldn't we? I didn't put Chris McKay's picture up here. Chris is an astrobiologist at NASA, and he specializes on the terraforming of Mars. And he makes this very interesting first principle. Life is better than non-life. That's his cardinal principle. Now, he says, if it turns out that Mars has no life, then we Earthlings are morally obligated to go to Mars and give Mars life. That's his moral argument. So I'm going to ask Adam, what do you think about that? Because right now it is a controversy. Should we go to Mars and colonize it or not? And in light of the things that you said about our vocation, I would think, to be consistent, your answer would be, yes, we should go to Mars because then we can fulfill our vocation. So I'd like to hear your opinion on that. So my three questions that I want to leave with Adam is, what is the grounding for your ontological grounding for your definition of Imago Dei as something supra-individual, supra-personal, and superhuman? Are you willing to give up human dignity? And if you're not, then you're going to have incoherence in your system. And then number three, will I see you on Mars or not?
5 minutes. Okay. Well, you know, when the third respondent suggested, you know, you've led towards genocide, and then the fourth one says maybe you've gone to cannibalism and slavery, there's probably something worth discussing. So I'm going to answer your questions all out of order, but we'll do it this way. So, yes, I would 100% agree with McKay in terms of the sort of, I actually find his argument really convincing, right? If life is better than non-life, and there's not already life on Mars, which I think is a big and probably there is not. The work that's being done on how small a habitable environment can be, and do you have something that's like a very small instance of a living thing, a few meters underneath the ground on Mars, I think is really interesting and complicates how we want to talk about terraforming and that kind of stuff. But in principle, yes, I agree with McKay. So I would be an advocate for saying you would go to Mars. You should try and do that. How am I grounding this notion of the Imago Dei? So I would agree that I probably can't get there out of Scripture alone. What I would suggest is that I think the Imago Dei can be interpreted more widely than it has been. And so part of what I am doing, I didn't really do it here, and so I feel like it's a really fair question. And I have a feeling a biblical scholar might not be real happy with me. But part of what I would suggest is that when we read the Imago Dei into the wider context of cosmogonies, into the Psalms, into Job, where it doesn't initially appear, treat it as a symbol that might be transported into those accounts, then we get something that puts human being closer to creation rather than closer to God. And the criteria by which the Imago Dei is held up as the means by which we are distinctive in the midst of creation isn't so much the point. I would be the first to say I don't think that's a normative reading of what's going on there. I also don't think it's an impossible one. And so, on the one hand, I'm not simply going to scripture, right? I am playing with those texts and trying to imagine how one reads them without a certain Enlightenment history that I think gets put upon them. That may be a move that's not sufficient for everybody. And I think it would be fair to say that there's probably a background piece there. There are ontological assumptions from the interaction that are shaping how we read those texts as well. So that may not be a sufficient answer, but I hope it gets us a little closer to where that was at. And then human dignity. So here is where I would push back. I don't think we've had human dignity. I think the record of human civilization building has been quite spotty. I think we have economic dignity, but for the most part, I'm not sure we value all human lives equally and that we could make that argument. So I'm not sure I'm actually giving anything up. But I think that's an argument that has to be had. And I think the standard argument is human dignity is the means by which we built Western civilization and democracy. Why on earth would you want to not rest with that point? And I think it's a lark. And I think if we really look at how it's been framed, it's not quite as helpful as we think it's been. So I'll stay consistent and give up.
Okay.